Hey, this is the Remote Podcast, and I'm your host, Victor Kung. You're listening to episode 3. Hello, and welcome to the Remote Podcast. This podcast is all about location independence, digital nomadism, and living life on your own terms. Each week, we interview a new guest on the show, and today I am sitting down with Sami Ahmed, a recent graduate of the Experience Institute in Chicago, a 12-month higher education program based on building real-world experiences through apprenticeships, self-guided projects, meetups, and coaching. In the past year, Sami has worked at companies in Hong Kong, Portugal, and Chicago. In this week's episode, we talk about the experience of living and working in a foreign country and some of the rewards and challenges of this experience. We discuss Sami's experience being homeschooled growing up, how he rejected a traditional MBA in favor of the Experience Institute, and creating his own learning experiences through multiple internships and travel experiences abroad. He shares the lessons he's learned through working in 3 countries during the past year. So sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 3 of the Remote Podcast. For the show notes and an interview transcription, visit theremotelifestyle.com/3. Sami and I met a few months ago at a group lunch, and we had a great conversation about living in different countries and traveling. So it's really awesome that we're able to bring him on the podcast.
Thanks.
So to start off, Sami is part of a program called the Experience Institute, and why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, so I just actually graduated last week from Experience Institute.
Congrats.
Thank you. It's basically like, the founder describes it as MBA school meets The Amazing Race. So it's divided up into 2 parts. You have apprenticeships, which you do for 3 months at a time, and then meetups, which are basically 2-week classes, 2-week sprints in Chicago. And this whole thing takes up a year. So an example would be like, in the fall, we have a meetup here where we study, design thinking, storytelling, business operations, and we're here for that 2-week period. And then you go off to do your apprenticeship for 3 months, and we just continue that rhythm for a year. So basically mine was designed as sort of like an alternative MBA. I was intending on going to a traditional MBA program, and I found Experience Institute and just went with that instead.
Okay, great. So you talked about how you would have internships, 3-month cycles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would these internships be in Chicago, or where would they be?
So they have a kind of like a network of host companies, a lot of which are located in Chicago or domestically in the U.S., but they also have some opportunities abroad, and I ended up taking 2. So the fall one, I was in a seed fund in Hong Kong, and in the spring I went to Portugal to work at a startup. And then I came back for my summer term to work in Chicago.
Awesome. Okay, so that's the Experience Institute, and I definitely want to get into that a little bit more later.
Sure.
But I wanted to take a step back to more of your childhood, your background, and basically everything that led you to making the eventual decision to pursue this alternative MBA program.
Sure, yeah. I gotta go kind of far back. So growing up, school was alternative already. I was actually homeschooled for up until college. So up until I pursued a community college sort of like AA degree, which was, I was like 17 when I dove into that. It was straight homeschooling. My brother and I are pretty close in age, so we would just be learning at home together. And at the end of the year, we would take kind of like a more traditional end of the year exam. And we usually placed, thank God, like a grade or 2 ahead of where we were supposed to be if we were in a public school. Yeah, so that was like most of childhood.
Could you dive in a little bit more about homeschooling?
Well, the story that my parents like to tell is my dad tried taking my older brother to like a kindergarten. We were living in Gainesville, Florida, and he didn't want to leave. Like, he grasped onto my dad for dear life because he didn't want to go to this school. And also at the time, for some reason they were running gun drills at the school, and just seeing that, I think as like the first thing that met my dad's attention. He just didn't want us going there, so he brought him back home. I was too young to be starting school, but he told my mom, I think we should try something else. And my mom is a great inspiration, and founded her own company, has always kind of been like a self-starter. And she just decided to start reading to us and start educating us.
Wow. So how was the experience growing up? How do you make friends as somebody who's homeschooled, and how do you be involved in like sports, all these like group activities where you're around other people your age?
And I feel like it's funny. It always comes up. Like people they ask me that every time they hear that I'm homeschooled. And it didn't feel difficult. And I don't know if that's just because we grew up in neighborhoods where there were children like around, so I could just like walk down the street and meet my friends after they got out of public school. But yeah, I played on soccer teams. I played tennis, like on a team with my brother and stuff. And it never really was a problem. I never really was like socially isolated. There was times when like I remember prom came up, and like you want to be with the cool kids and stuff. And there were sometimes when it came to that, you had to go like do a little extra work, but I still like I attended the prom of the closest public school to my house.
Whoa.
Just because I was like, even though I'm homeschooled doesn't mean I can't go to these things. So I think I just figured out loopholes. I just made it work the way that I wanted it to.
That's great. Yeah. So you mentioned when you were 17 you enrolled in college, and how was that experience, like going from homeschooling to a campus, classrooms?
So it was a dual enrollment program. So I was still technically taking high school classes. I was doing an online high school at the time, and I would take a couple credits at the local community college, just general ed kind of stuff. The transition was, I think it was kind of illuminating to me about how much I felt like I could get away with more than I thought I could, like in a class. So before that, I never really like sat in a class with other students. And I remember some of the first experiences, I was trying to be like fully attentive, sitting up at the front of the class and stuff. And just kind of like looking around, people were not really that attentive and not really that engaged. And it was very different from when I was at home and learning, because you are accountable. If you're homeschooled and you have just a brother there, that's the classroom, right? So if you're seen like taking out your phone, or I don't know, just not paying attention, it's like you're going to be called out on it, So I was fully present during those homeschooling times. And then moving to the classes, it felt like easy. Like it felt like I was getting good grades, like things were fine, it felt much easier, much less accountability.
As you were growing up, did you have any travel experiences? Because I guess since you're homeschooled, you don't really have to follow any schedule, any school academic calendar. How was that experience? Were you able to learn a lot outside of the classroom?
Every Friday, my mom would take us to the Museum of Science and Industry. It was pretty close to our house. I was raised in Tampa, Florida, and there was that Museum of Science and Industry pretty close. And we would go there and just kind of play around with things. She would take us and, we would go to like an exhibit, and she would talk to us about what's in the exhibit. And yeah, I think that was like a weekly thing that we did that I looked forward to kind of go and play around. As far as like traveling goes, we usually had one big like international travel of some kind with the family once a year. So we got to go to see my dad's family in Egypt. He was from Cairo, Egypt. So we got to go see his family. We went to do a big Europe trip one time. We saw Brussels, Munich, kind of all around that area. That was the extent of the traveling.
Okay, that's great. So it sounds like you had a lot of opportunities to travel as well. So once you finished up your online high school and that dual enrollment program, what was next?
After that, it was pursuing a college degree. Yeah, we were both expected to attend a college. Both of my parents went to college too. So yeah, I started applying, taking the SAT, ACT, and that actually was a horrible experience for me because I was not used to being a good test taker. So when you're homeschooled, or at least the homeschooling style that my mom adopted, like you don't really get a feel for high stakes tests because it's more of like understanding, right? You know, it's more of like she would read something to us and then ask us questions about it.
Right.
But the stakes were like my mom, and you know, I respected her discipline and respected her and all of that, but it wasn't like, you know, some scary professor that could expel me from school and then I wouldn't know what to do with my life. It wasn't like that. So doing that SAT ACT thing was like, I really hated it. I think I took the SAT like 3 times. I took the ACT twice, and I ended up just getting an ACT score that was like high enough that I could get into the schools that I wanted to get into. So if there was one downside for the homeschooling, I think it was not being like an ace on the tests.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, nobody listening to this enjoyed like the high stakes tests.
Yeah.
Those are always the worst part. Okay, great. So in college, how did things change from there? What new opportunities did you have that you didn't have before, and how did you take advantage of them?
New opportunities in college. I think, well, the biggest thing was being, you know, first time on your own and everything, right? I was living with my parents and at their house in the same city I grew up in. So I went to Miami, Florida, which is basically like its own country, right? It doesn't really feel like you're in Florida anymore. And yeah, they're just like being the initial, like being on your own, that new independence was really big for me. And I really embraced it. Like I was, you know, I was with some student groups, like trying to just travel as much as I could. I had my van with me, like the second semester of school. I drove my van down to Miami and was like driving around all I could in Miami. So yeah, I think definitely the biggest thing for me was like that independence.
Okay, so through college, were you exposed to anything that eventually led you to decide to get an MBA? And did you work between that, or did you go straight from school to wanting to get that go that next step?
So school, it wasn't something that happened in school, but I'd studied music production degree at the University of Miami, and I got a minor in business. In the music production degree, as I was like a junior/senior, I started just doing my projects at a professional studio in Miami. So like I would go there with my classmate, and we would work on projects that were for school, just to kind of see like what the pros were doing, like what is happening in real life outside of the academic kind of bubble. And so just by hanging out there and you know, having like the producers come in and the people that worked at the studio come in and check out what I was making with my friends, I ended up arranging a job straight out of school with them. So after my senior recital, basically these guys contacted me from the studio and said, would you like to come work with us full time? And I was jazzed about it. They gave me a place to live in the studio. So it was like, yeah, I had this little bed, this little bedroom, like literally it was bedroom. You walk into this kitchen, and then from the kitchen, it's like professional grade, amazing studio spaces. I got to not work with, but I got to watch Diplo and Skrillex, and all these FKA Twigs, like all of these crazy, you know, they're still like some of the biggest names in the music industry today. Like they were working there, so it was really cool to be around that. But alongside of them, on the other side of the coin from them, I kind of got to see like the dark side of the industry too. I got to see, you know, these guys that were like my heroes that were working at the studio full time / the people that had founded the studio. I feel like they weren't getting like what they expected. You know, there was like a general vibe of like, you know, something's not working. And they weren't, you know, they weren't making the cash they wanted to make. They weren't making the songs they wanted to make. It was a lot of like kind of, you know, jingly kind of work and stuff like that. It wasn't like making the records that they saw Diplo and Skrillex making and stuff. So I think seeing that, it made me kind of think like what was wrong. like what is going on at the studio that is causing, you know, these people not to make the money that I think they should be making. Like, why aren't they have the chops, like they have the music, they have the abilities that these other stars do that are working there, but they're just not, you know, getting the fruits of their labor, if you will. So that kind of led me to the MBA idea, because I was thinking, you know, I don't understand like the revenue streams, like how are we even making money? You know, how could we make more money? How could we reshape the business model of this studio so that it's supporting everybody in it fairly?
Okay.
And those kind of questions, I think, started to lead me towards like, okay, you need to go like study more business, because this is basically a business question.
No, that makes sense. So I take it your passion is still music. So the idea is to go back down that route eventually, or?
It's sort of a question that lingers. Basically, every evening I set aside, you know, 1 or 2 hours to write. So I still actively compose music.
Oh, okay.
And produce music at night. But I kind of want to like help usher in, you know, change on like a big scale of some kind. You know, everybody wants to make a big impact while they're here on Earth, right? And I feel like I need to understand the people that are doing that now, and I see that in the tech industry a lot.
Okay.
You know, I see like a lot of my idols are sort of either musicians or like tech heads, and I feel like I've started to get a pretty good understanding and feel of like the musicians, and now I'm moving into like this other sphere of like tech and understanding that industry.
Okay, great. So I think that's a great link to the alternative MBA program. So can you tell us a bit about how you went about your search and what really stood out about the Experience Institute and the opportunities that it presented for you?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I went to a private school. So University of Miami is a private school. Mm-hmm. So it's more expensive than like the public schools in Florida.
Right.
Coming off of that, I was looking at like Loyola and all these other schools in Chicago. I'd moved to Chicago after this Miami studio experience. I was looking at these MBA schools in Chicago, and you know the price tag is like around 6 figures in general, right? Like you will be in debt most likely.
It's crazy.
Yeah, right. Unless you have 6 figures laying around. I don't think most people going to check out these programs do. So off the bat, I saw that prospect of like, okay, you know, am I gonna be able to survive like another round of kind of like debt, or basically paying like a tenth of that to go and do Experience Institute. So right off the bat, just from like a feasibility perspective, Experience Institute was like definitely on my radar from that perspective. In addition to that, the conversations that I remember distinctly, the conversation that I had with Victor Saad, who's the founder of EI, he wanted to know like about me. The questions that he asked were just more, I felt like he wanted to really understand the why behind, you know, what I was trying to do. And when I went to these counselor meetings with the MBA programs, it felt kind of superficial, you know. It felt like, oh well, if you choose to go on our finance track, then you know you'll be able to work on Wall Street. It didn't feel like me. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, it sounded like when you're going to these informational sessions for these established institutions, it's more about how you fit into the tracks that they provided.
Yes, definitely. It was more of like a like outward process, right? Like looking out at what they had laid out, and how do I fit into those right. You know, different tracks, versus Victor was definitely doing the opposite in the conversations. He was trying to dig things out of me so that I could lay out, you know, like a plan for the year, which feels awesome. You know, like everybody wants to feel heard, and everybody wants to, I think, have an understanding of themselves before they take some kind of step like this, because it's a big step, you know?
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And so can you tell us a bit about the process of, you know, laying out those plans, and how you kind of curated your own experience, and then afterwards we can like dive more into the nitty-gritty.
Sure, yeah. So laying out the plans for the experience, initially it was really daunting. So before even the first meetup happened, I remember sending him like emails like, you know, I'm trying to open up conversations with this host company in Chicago. Would you mind like, giving me an intro and like starting to get that going. And I was kind of like really nervous that I wouldn't have this apprenticeship lined up for the fall. And it sort of continued like that, actually, even through the meetups. Like I still didn't have anything through that 2-week period. Most of my classmates were already lining things up, and I was still kind of like, well, I'm sort of interested in this. I want to understand the music industry better. I want to understand business models better. It's very like general, right? Like that's like it's a very like macro idea.
Right.
So yeah, I ended up just kind of finding this opportunity in Hong Kong to work at a venture studio there, at a venture fund. So it was a seed fund there, and they were sourcing startup companies, and it seemed like it would be a good opportunity for me to try to understand like how they sourced companies. So
Right.
what did they see in these small companies in order to want to inject some capital into them?
Okay.
And that seemed to work with the logic in my brain, like what makes company A more valuable or more attractive than company
Right.
B.
So to make sure I'm understanding you correctly,
Sure.
so the people who are part of the Experience Institute, they're in charge of kind of sourcing their own apprenticeships through the network that's provided.
Right.
Okay.
So it's not an apprenticeship placing program, which I want to be really explicit about, because I think a lot of people get interested in EI because they think that they're gonna pick up, see you working and just place you in one of these companies and you figure it out. And it's not like that at all. There's a lot of self-awareness work that goes into the fall term, where you're asked questions like, what does personal success look like to you? Like, even that question, even if I ask myself that question now, like I already get this feeling of like, oh my God, like this is it's really personal. Like they get really deep. And the reason why they do that is that they want you to have conviction and understand why you're going after whatever you pursue, especially for that first term. So yeah, it was a very traditional interviewing process after that. They did a good job of giving me like the foot in the door. So they introduced me to the seed fund in Hong Kong. But after that, it was all up to me to, talk to my boss Roland there.
Wow.
And get it set up.
So that's really interesting, because one of my personal gripes with higher level education is that it always seems like I have to pick from a list of classes. I have to do all these things just to fulfill requirements so I can get like a major or a minor. But none of these classes were about me. They're always about other things. And for me, right when I graduated from college, I went through this period when I was like, I have no idea what I want to do, what I'm passionate about. So I ended up just reading self-help book after self-help book, learning about mindfulness. And it seems that EI is a place where they have a program in place. They have timelines, they have things like that. But it seems like a lot of the direct support they give you is helping you navigate this journey yourself and giving you the resources to be able to carve out that own path.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, without trying to get too hippy dippy in my answer, Experience Institute is basically a lifestyle. Like, after going through this year, I've realized that it's much more than just, looking more attractive to an employer after you're out of it. It's, how are you going to deal with the inevitable uncertainty that is, your life as you get older? And this year is like a crash course in that, because there is so much uncertainty. And that is the core. The core is being able to navigate that on your own.
So that's awesome. I think it's wonderful to have a program that does that. So to dive a bit deeper, can you tell us a bit about your experiences first in Hong Kong, and then your experiences in the other organizations and the cities that you had through Experience Institute?
Yeah. So starting with the fall, I went to work at a seed fund in Hong Kong. And so they were deep in sourcing companies. So basically, just to give like a macro view of how venture capital, the 3 stages are, sourcing a company. So that's finding, new deals and checking out what you're going to invest in. Then doing the due diligence. So looking at, their books, checking out, is this something that we are really serious about pulling the trigger on? And finally, actually pulling the trigger. So the 3rd stage is execution. So they were only sourcing deals. at the time that I was there. So that meant a lot of time going to dinners, which I have no gripes about. It was so awesome. Going to, they hosted hackathons in their space. They had, fintech challenges that we got to go check out. It was really cool, especially just hanging out in the area that they had, because it was a co-working space on one side. Mm-hmm. Then you'd walk down this long elevator bank, and our office was there. And that was the venture. That was where the VC guys were. So you kind of you were able to go across the hall and go and see all these developers and all these people building their vision, and then go into your office and hang out with all the finance guys. So it was such a cool blend of people. I never got tired of it. I probably slept 4 hours a night for 3 months.
Wow, sounds like you were in a very energizing environment with a lot of cool people. How did you find the transition from living in the United States to going to Hong Kong and actually living and working there?
Well, the transition took place over a week. So basically, Roland, who was my boss at this firm in Hong Kong, he told me if you could be here in a week's time, it would be great. And I was really antsy to get my apprenticeship started, because like I'd said, I was sort of like an outlier. I was taking a while to actually pull the trigger on my apprenticeship. So I looked on Orbitz, and shout out to my brother for being the best brother in the world. He actually helped me pull together the money to buy this ticket last minute to go to Hong Kong. So I was there within a week. I don't think I really fully processed what was going to happen. I was just like, I'm doing this. This is happening. I'm going. I got a sublet for my apartment here in Chicago. I jumped on the plane. I got there. I was living on somebody's couch, a stranger's couch, for the first month, for the full first month, because I had no housing. I didn't even.
Was that couch surfing?
It was couch surfing. Yeah.
Oh, they let you couch surf for that long?
Yeah, and she was an amazing host. I can't believe that it worked out like that still. But yeah, it was. I think that it was actually it was sort of amazing that it happened that way, because she lived in Kowloon, which is real Hong Kong. It's not like going over into Hong Kong Island. We were in the offices in it's in Causeway Bay area.
Oh yeah.
So it's it's very you picked up New York and you just put it in Asia. But when you went to Kowloon, I was it was such an immersive thing. I would go into the restaurants, and I would always have to have my host come with me, because there was no English speakers. But then
she is the best host ever.
Right. She was. I can't believe. I'm so amazed that I was able to have that work out. But I'm so grateful for it, because it was so cool to be in Kowloon, to see that, see the real Hong Kong.
Yeah. What were some of the things that were difficult about being in a new country, in a foreign environment? You mentioned the language. Was there anything else that really stood out to you?
I think I had sort of a expectation that I should try to, you don't want to offend people, right? When you go to when you're a foreigner somewhere and you're sticking out, I stuck out like a sore thumb. So I was kind of worried about PC and, just not saying the wrong thing. And then I noticed that I remember asking my boss this. It was so funny. I was like, people keep on calling me Guilo. What does Guilo mean? Which literally translates to ghost man, right? So people were basically I didn't take offense to it. It's I guess you could view it as a slur. I don't know. But the fact that people were calling me Guilo, it kind of and I figured out what it meant. It kind of opened me up. I was like, okay, that obviously, political correctness is not something I should be worrying about here, because I'm getting called, Guilo walking around. And after that, I just sort of started to open up. I think the challenges that I had that I was anticipating were not, they weren't really real, worrying about getting around, worrying about all this stuff. The infrastructure there is amazing. I was able to take the metro there, the subway, I forgot what it's called, but
the MTR.
I was able to take the MTR anywhere, and it was so fast, and it was easy for me to access. It was very crowded. But I don't think that issues like that, being around too many people or worrying about offending people, it didn't really bug me too much. I feel like I was just able to assimilate pretty quickly. Maybe maybe a challenge was missing, like, I remember missing my diet because it was hard for me to find, peanut butter, and hard for me to find, like, I wanted to make, like, I have this shake that I make in the morning after I work out, and I couldn't make it there. Right, because I couldn't find, like, a bag of kale, and I couldn't find, like, all these things that go into that smoothie. I remember trying to find milk was kind of weird, like dairy products, because they had this thing that was like a milk beverage. So it wasn't really dairy. It was just like, I don't know. It was something strange, and it didn't taste
and sometimes they have like powdered milk. Powdered milk is really big.
Maybe it was powdered
in Asia
milk
as well.
Yeah, I don't know what it was, but I think I missed my diet. I remember missing my diet. But I didn't really miss a lot. I really was jazzed to be there. It was a really great experience.
Yeah, did you have some time to do some traveling around the area, around the region?
I got to do, I went to the Northern Territories.
Okay.
So that, up north, basically, really close to the border of China. And we did some hiking. It was mostly hiking trips. So I climbed Taimo Shan, which is the highest.
Yeah.
The highest peak there. And it was incredible. I mean, I really liked that about the city, because I could basically every morning I was trying to go hiking somewhere else. But if I couldn't, I would just go to Victoria Peak and, go there in the morning. And then literally I would have time to come and be in the office at, 9:30. So I tried to do that every day. I loved the hiking there. Yeah,
it's a lot of people don't know that about Hong Kong. It's so industrialized, so urbanized, but half the island is like full of
protected land. Yeah, because the British, it's just made it protected. So
nobody's going to build on it. If you're on the peak, on one side you see the skyline of Hong Kong Island and Kowloon, and on the other side you don't see anything. It's
just all the islands and all the green. Yeah, I wish I could go back. I really miss that.
Well, we're gonna change the topic so you don't have to be sad about that. But after Hong Kong, what did you do next?
After Hong Kong, I came back for the next meetup in Chicago. So came back in the winter, which was horrible. I'd never been through winter before, so it was freezing. It was actually snowing the day I landed. Basically, I think I had like a sort of like a week buffer time or something like that. It was a short period to be resting, and then right back into a 2-week sprint with the rest of my cohort from EI.
What was the next internship that you did?
So after that 2-week sprint, I was sort of doing work for a product design company in Portugal while I was ending my apprenticeship in Hong Kong. Just little things like looking up, they were doing a Kickstarter campaign for a new product that they were going to launch. So just kind of proofreading it, because their native language was not, they're Portuguese, they're speaking Portuguese. And the English was, needed a little bit of work. So just like proofreading things for them and starting to build a relationship. And I just stayed on their radar, and I kept building that relationship up. And I think probably midway through that second meetup, I decided to pull the trigger on going to Portugal and working for that product design company.
So how was the transition this time? Did you have more than a week, or was it very much along the same?
This one was it was easier. I think I sort of like bursted my international worries. Like I had been traveling internationally before Hong Kong, but I'd never lived internationally. So I think I had some made up anxieties, some things that I thought, what if I can't speak the language and these people put me in a cage and nobody finds me for the rest of my life, like just things that like are never going to happen. All of those anxieties left after Hong Kong. So pulling the trigger on Portugal was kind of it felt really natural. I wasn't worried about leaving this time.
Right, so it was just like another adventure.
Yeah, it's just another place. It really is. Yeah.
It's interesting how after you get over that initial hurdle, a lot of the you might have some preconceptions that you have of living internationally. All that kind of dissolves after the first experience, and you realize that each place you go to, it's just a new place. It's a new adventure. People are still the same. People still need to do the same things. They still need to work. They still need to eat. It's not that different.
Right. I mean, yeah. I don't want to, I don't want to give somebody the wrong advice and, tell them that going to travel anywhere internationally is going to be a safe bet, because there was one member of the cohort that ended up going to, I think it was South Africa, and he was in kind of a sketchier area and ended up like, he got his phone taken from him or something like that. So, take the precautions that you should. But yeah, it is like, I think growing up in America and kind of having this idea that, it's just unsafe outside of our borders is kind of, it's ludicrous, and we shouldn't have that mentality.
Right. So, what type of work were you doing in Portugal?
Yeah.
And that was a 3-month period, right?
Right. Yeah. Another apprenticeship there. So this was a lot different. So instead of doing the investor side, I sort of like jumped over the table, and I was now with like a startup. And this was this very, very early stage startup. The team was 3 people. All product design kind of background. There was, well, okay, that's not true. One of the girls was kind of more into the graphic side of stuff, but for the most part, it was all product designers. And so jumping into that team was definitely challenging, I think, to like just get assimilated into such a small team, and especially like it was a smaller town. So it wasn't a large city like, Hong Kong has Australians. It has people from all over, and it's this huge metropolis. This was like, I could run to the edge of this city in the morning, versus climbing a mountain in Hong Kong. Yeah.
So what's some of the things that you had to get used to? Like with I assume the pace of life was very, very different going from lively, thriving metropolis to a smaller town in Portugal. And was it hard to get used to that, or was it more of the same?
It was very difficult, actually. I think that I remember having a conversation with Roland, my boss from Hong Kong, about going to Portugal because I think he'd vacationed there earlier the year or something. And I was asking him, what is it like? And he was kind of like apprehensive to talk about it. Like he would say, oh, it's really beautiful, and just, not go any further. And this guy talks all the time. So I was like, okay, you really need to tell me, like, what's the deal? And he told me it's slower, it's a slower pace. Like it's going from this place that's one of the most densely populated areas in the world to, just people being in their own areas, having like going back to their families on the weekend and stuff like that. So yeah, I think initially I kind of got the blues when I was there. I was kind of like, man, it's hard. It was hard for me to stay motivated, I think, in that kind of environment. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a harder transition. Yeah.
How did you get over the initial blues? Was it just accepting that maybe a slower pace life, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different outlook or a perspective on life.
I think, yeah, how did I settle into it? It was okay. Well, there was a few things that kind of went into it. I wasn't sure how to provide like immediate value to this company, and it ended up making me butt heads with my superior initially. We had one meeting. I think it was like 2 weeks into my being there, and yeah, it was not. I mean, it wasn't a good meeting. He basically said, I don't know how this is going to work out. So it was at that point I was like, man, you need to figure this out, or you need to go home, because this is not off to a good start. So I think I just started trying to log everything I was doing, so I could quickly communicate to him, like, this is what I did this morning, and here it is we were using Trello at the time, which is not the, maybe not the greatest tool, but it's good for very high level project management. So I would log every single thing I was doing into Trello, so he could go ahead and check that out, rather than trying, at the end of like a sprint, a 2-week period or something, trying to just relay to him everything that I'd done, because his days are packed, so he doesn't have time to catch up with me every day. And I think I think that was a big step for us to understand what each other were doing, and for him to feel some relief, like, okay, he's okay, like he's able to do the things that he wants to do. I can kind of like push off the gas a little bit and let him settle into the team. And so, yeah, then I started to get a rhythm. I also started to develop pretty deep relationships with my coworkers, because it was such a small team. So I was able to like assimilate in after that.
Okay, so it sounds like your process of assimilation in Portugal was really more down to the relationships you were able to establish with the people around you.
Yeah, I mean, I think with a team that small, if you don't like one of your coworkers, or if you can't figure out a way for the work to be meaningful and productive, it's you can't be there, because everything is happening so quickly and everybody's really working pretty late. So you need to be able to really bring it. Otherwise, you shouldn't be there.
I think that's really interesting. And do you think one of the reason these social relationships were so important was also because of the fact that you mentioned the town you were in was pretty small and the pace of life was a bit slower. So really your main focus there was more work as opposed to perhaps the distractions that a larger city. You mentioned in Hong Kong, you were able to hike, to explore different things. Could you go into that a little bit?
Well, I definitely think just from the way that I work and I feed like my own energy is kind of through what you're talking about, like staying busy. And even if that means going to like a hackathon after work, or going to a dinner with your coworkers, and that was more common in the workplace when I was in Hong Kong. I think going to Portugal and not having those things, even though they could be seen as like extra work for people, I think it made me less energized. It made me feel like there was less it didn't feed my whatever drives me to do the things that I do. It just wasn't pushing me as hard. And yeah, I felt more insular, more taking runs on my own kind of vibe rather than like going on a hike with my coworkers.
Right. That's really interesting, and I think that's a good thing for people to know. So after Portugal, you came back to Chicago to serve in your third internship program, and tell us a little bit about what you did there.
Sure. Yeah. So the third apprenticeship was with Proto Ventures, which is a venture studio here in Chicago. Just to demystify venture studio, because I think a lot of people get confused about it. It's basically a team of people that are spinning out different ventures, right? So like Dollar Shave Club, if you've heard about them, they came out of a venture studio. And they're like one of the first examples. This whole venture studio model is like brand new. I think probably like within the last couple years, we've been seeing them pop up. So it's not an incubator. Because this is an internal team. It was mostly developers. There's a couple like product people, a couple marketing focused people. Yeah. But they are all like basically building their own startup or their own project. And then if one of them takes off, you can worry about staffing it and worrying about all of those kind of details. But it was I think that model is kind of cool, and it kind of makes sense for how software is so scalable. It seems like it's a really good way to like diversify your risk and stuff.
I think that's really cool, because I always thought about it. Sometimes it didn't make sense to me that people with not a lot of resources, they're really struggling bootstrapping to start their own startup. Whereas if you can leverage the resources of a larger organization and to maybe have like a division within that company that just focuses on creating new ideas and working on new innovative things, wouldn't that be easier? Because you don't have to spend so much time fundraising, pitching to investors. You could just focus on building the software.
Right. Yeah, and they were basically focused. I mean, they're still focused on building their products and stuff. I don't think that they have plans of doing like a raise or anything like that anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think that's great. So, okay. So you were working at Proto, and you mentioned that you graduated last week. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So what is next?
I'm trying to dive deeper into tech. Coming from a pretty non-technical background, it seems like it would make sense for me to go into quality assurance, which is basically what I was doing. A lot of the things I was doing with Proto were quality assurance. So testing software products, testing SaaS products, just getting more familiar with working with developers and working with product teams and making something awesome.
I think it's really cool how you were able to go from a musical background and then to take this alternative MBA program where you were not only exposed to technology, but also you're able to experience different cultures. And I'm curious, how do you think that that's impacted you? Because you mentioned that the Experience Institute has a heavy emphasis on self-awareness and figuring out what you really want out of life.
Yeah.
So if you were to compare yourself prior to your Experience Institute experience, how do you think you've changed?
Yeah, I mean, definitely right off the bat, I think it's gonna sound pretty cliche, but just realizing that a lot of my happiness is not a number. I think coming out of school, a lot of people are, checking Glassdoor for all of the positions that they apply to and stuff, and thinking that this financial goal is what's going to fulfill them. And if this year has taught me anything, it's like, what are the bare minimum things that I need to be happy? Because there was a lot of situations when I was abroad where I was out of the comforts, out of the things that I usually would have at my fingertips. And during those periods where I felt stretched thin, I realized the things that I was doing in order to stay positive or in order to make me happy. And those, things like fitness and things like, making music or just making something, I just came to realize like those are like, that's my essence. That's like, if you took away all of my belongings, if you took away all of my things, like I think that the year and being abroad kind of made me see like it like distilled me down to like the bare minimum,
Mm-hmm. So looking at your life from a mid to long term perspective, do you have goals of living in different countries and working in different countries? Did you get the travel bug?
Definitely got the travel bug. My brother is relocating to Australia this weekend, and we kept on talking about living together there. And sometimes I've just been thinking about it recently more and more. And it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like it's scary, and B, I can't stop thinking about it. And I don't think I would have either of those two feelings if it wasn't for this year of international travel. And I don't think that I'm the kind of person that's going to be happy just traveling 2-week periods throughout the year. Like I think, and this works for a lot of people. I don't want to put them down in any way, but I don't think working a 9 to 5 and only having, like 2 weeks off every year to go and travel somewhere, I just don't see that as being enriching to my life as going to spend 2 to 3 months somewhere where you're living. You're not just, going to see what you should be seeing or whatever, and living, in a resort for that period of time. It's just not the way that I like to experience things. I don't think that that's true to me.
Right. So, and I think that's particularly interesting given the fact that you have done international travel when you were growing up. Mm-hmm. The experience of actually living somewhere is completely different from the experience of visiting and being a tourist.
Yeah.
For the people out there who are really thinking about kind of ditching the 9 to 5 office job and living remotely and traveling around the world, based on your experiences, what do you think is the best option for them to live that kind of lifestyle? What can they do to start moving towards that kind of lifestyle? Is this something where they need to have the skill set to do so? They need to be looking at certain types of jobs? Or is it something that they can just buy a one-way ticket, couch surf for a month, and figure things out from there?
Obviously, it has to do with like point of life. If you are young enough and flexible enough in order to do the style of a couch surfing kind of thing, I would implore you to, because you get to experience wherever you're going from the eyes of somebody that is a local, obviously. But in terms of like changing your mindset, I think a lot of internal facing exercises, a lot of like, why do you feel like you need to make this transition? Why is the 9 to 5 not working for you? And it needs to go much deeper than just, I don't like my manager, or I know that I could be making more money. Like go deeper. Like really ask yourself why, and ask yourself why again and why again, and try to distill, what is the rationale behind why you're going to do this. There's a great tool if you're looking for specific tools. There's a leap kit, which is something that's actually developed by EI. Mm-hmm. You can look it up online. But basically you write out like your vision and actionable items that you can start to perform in order to go where you want to go. But I think if I had one piece of information for people, I would tell them, you need to sit down with like a good friend or a loved one, and I think really try to go down to like the deepest why that you could get to, or just journal to yourself, like what are these things that are driving me towards this decision?
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think that's great advice, and we'll definitely include a link to the Leap Kit in the show notes. So in terms of how you're approaching your next steps, you mentioned how living in different countries and having those experiences is something that you want to continue to pursue. How are you personally moving yourself in that direction?
to pursuing more of a traveling lifestyle? Is that?
Yeah.
I think keeping this just like flexible nature,
Because you mentioned that you're currently looking for roles
Right.
in Chicago. Are you looking for a specific type of role that gives you that flexibility? Or perhaps right now is the goal just to build experience in this industry that you're relatively unfamiliar with?
Definitely the goal is building familiarity within tech. That's definitely a big one. I also feel like Chicago is pretty novel for me still. Because I basically moved here last year and then spent the whole year, traveling abroad. So it sort of feels like if I got a job in Chicago, I would stick around for a little bit just because it feels like I'm still in a very new environment that I have yet to really understand. I don't know if I'm actively pursuing other ways to stay kind of like in the loop for international travel, but I think just being open to it, just telling myself like you won't be happy traveling for 2-week periods because I know that for myself now.
Right.
I think just making sure that I stay true to that on some level is what I'm doing, but I don't have like any actionable things right now.
Okay.
For that, yeah.
No, but that's super exciting. You finally get to discover more about Chicago, and I think you'll know when it's time, when you kind of feel maybe that sinking feeling, that trapped feeling in your chest, or when
Right.
you feel not as happy as you used to be waking up every day doing the same thing. I think
Right.
I
think the rhythms that I've picked up from this past year with Experience Institute are kind of informing what we're talking about, because I didn't do any kind of self-awareness, any kind of like form of journaling or any kind of form of mindfulness or checking in with myself, which I recommend to everybody now, because that will definitely tell me, if I get to a place where it's like it's time for me to go and broaden my horizons again.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a great note to end on. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. How can people who are listening learn more about you and follow you in your next steps?
My personal website is just hello, and then my name, Sami, Sami, last name Ahmed, AHMED.com.
Okay, great. And that'll link to all your social media profiles.
Yep. Yeah.
Awesome. We'll definitely include a link of that in the show notes. But thank you again, and best of luck with your next steps.
Thanks, Victor.
Thanks for listening to my interview with Sami. If you want to find out more about Sami and his adventures, along with more information on everything we talked about, visit theremotelifestyle.com/3. That is THEREMOTELIFESTYLE.com/3, where you can find the show notes and transcription for this week's episode. That's all for now. Thanks for listening, and be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next episode.